On my brother's wedding day, I witnessed my husband pinning my future sister-in-law down on the bed in my brother's bridal suite. Instead of kicking the door open, I broke down and told my brother everything about the betrayal. But instead of seeing the rage or panic of a groom betrayed by his own fiancée, what I saw was an eerie calm on my brother's face. He gave a faint smirk, leaned down, and whispered, "Don't worry, little sister. They'll fall apart when the wedding begins." That May, the backyard of my brother's riverside house in Detroit gleamed in the sunlight, draped in white ribbons, wild daisies, and simple wooden tables he had built himself. Isaac, 37, was not just my brother. He had raised me since I was 9, until I was strong enough to stand on my own. And even after that, he remained the only pillar I had. Today was his wedding day, a small, warm, unpretentious ceremony that reflected exactly who he was: genuine, calm, and always putting family first. I was truly happy for him. Tiffany, the bride, was a co-worker my husband, Michael, often mentioned. The two of them looked radiant standing beneath the flower arch he had crafted from pine wood. I had always thought life was finally making it up to him after everything he had been through. As for me, I believed I was living in a peaceful marriage. Michael was always gentle, calm, the kind of husband anyone would look at and say, "Melissa's really lucky." If someone had told me then that in just a few minutes everything I believed would collapse, I probably would have laughed. Isaac was adjusting his boutonniere when he suddenly remembered something. He turned to me. "Melissa, I left the wedding rings on the nightstand. Can you grab them for me?" I nodded, entered the house through the back door, and climbed the familiar wooden stairs, moving lightly like someone who had no idea she was about to lose everything. As I approached his bedroom, I noticed the door was ajar. A sliver of golden light slipped through the crack. I figured Isaac must have been in such a rush that he forgot to close it. I reached out, gently pushed the door open just a little more, just a little, and then I froze. Inside my brother's bedroom, Michael was leaning into Tiffany. One of his hands was around her waist, the other lifting her wedding dress. Tiffany's arms were looped around his neck, giggling as if this was their real wedding. My heart stopped, but my legs wouldn't move. Michael and Tiffany had no idea I was standing just outside the door, holding my breath so tightly my chest ached. "Soon," Michael said, voice low and firm. "Once the ceremony's done and the ownership papers are signed, everything will be ours." I heard it, every word. Tiffany laughed. "She's so dumb. I almost feel bad for her. Your wife actually believes in you completely." "Melissa always believes," Michael said smugly. "A lawyer wife that sweet? Easy to manipulate?" I stood outside the door, fingers digging into the wall, trembling so hard they went numb. They kept going, like they were discussing a business deal. Not my life. "This riverside house is a nice bonus," Tiffany said. "And Isaac's share too. I didn't think the plan would go this smoothly." Michael scoffed. "Once it's done, I'll dump her. She doesn't suspect a thing." Tiffany tilted her head. "You sure? What if she finds out?" "If Melissa ever figures it out, the sun will rise in the west," Michael said mockingly. "Trust me." They kissed. Openly, greedily, with a hunger full of control and calculation. Unaware that the door had never fully closed, unaware that the stupid wife they spoke of was only a few steps away, silently feeling her heart shatter. Only when Tiffany shifted, catching her breath and changing position, did I dare step back, very softly, without making a sound. I closed the door with the same gentle pressure I'd used to open it, then turned away, like a ghost stepping out of a nightmare I didn't want to believe. I don't remember how I got down the stairs, only that my legs felt hollow. I stepped out into the backyard, eyes blurred by sunlight, searching for Isaac among the laughter and chatter of guests. When I pulled him aside and told him everything, my voice cracked like glass hitting tile. Isaac didn't press, didn't panic. He gave a faint smirk, leaned down and whispered, "Don't worry, little sister. They'll collapse when the wedding begins." And in that exact moment, I realized my brother had known this secret for a very long time, and he had prepared for it. Isaac led me further away from the backyard, to the wooden porch where the sound of the Detroit River crashing against the bank drowned out the noise of the crowd. He placed his hand on the railing, exhaling like someone who had carried a heavy burden for far too long, then spoke slowly, each word unlocking a door he had kept shut for months. "Melissa, I've known about this," he said. I stayed silent, only meeting his eyes, and Isaac began to tell me. "Last Christmas Eve," he said, "I went down to the office to grab some files for the audit. The snow was falling so thick you could barely make out license plates, but I saw Michael. He was slipping out the back door of the building, and Tiffany was right behind him." He paused, locking eyes with me as if to make sure I was strong enough to hear the rest. "They didn't see me." Michael opened the company car door, shielding Tiffany as she climbed in. Then they drove off. I knew right then. This wasn't just an affair. My heart clenched, but Isaac pressed on, his voice deepening. The very next day, I called Harris. "You remember Uncle Harris, don't you? Dad's old friend, the one who helped us when our parents were still alive." I nodded, remembering the kind man with silver hair and a warm, low voice. "Harris is a private investigator now. I asked him to look into Tiffany's real background." Isaac glanced back toward the wedding site in the distance, as if observing enemies from a safe vantage point. "And what Harris found was worse than I imagined." He stopped for half a second, long enough for my breath to catch. "Tiffany," Isaac said, "is the unofficial foster daughter of Caldwell." I stepped back. "Caldwell?" Isaac nodded. "CEO of Aurelian Holdings, the man who once tried to buy Miller Construction at any cost. And you know, Dad rejected him flat out. Ever since, Caldwell has seen our family as a thorn in his side." The wooden floor beneath me felt like it was swaying. But Isaac continued. "Tiffany's family went bankrupt when she was 13. Caldwell took her in, paid for her school, gave her a place to live, and in return, he groomed her into a soft weapon, a tool to get close to the targets he wanted to take down." I heard it all, but couldn't believe that the woman standing beside Isaac at the altar had come from that kind of past. "Tiffany owes Caldwell everything, and he's holding secrets about her family that give him even more control," Isaac said. "She never had a choice. Caldwell wanted her to get to us through Michael, and she did." My chest tightened. Michael? Was he just another pawn? But Isaac shook his head. Michael is simply Caldwell's latest piece. Easy to manipulate, easy to buy, and greedy enough to do whatever Caldwell needed. The riverside wind blew through, lifting the lace on the tablecloths in the distance. That's when I understood. This wasn't a story about a husband's betrayal. This was a war my brother had been fighting in silence for half a year, while I had been completely unaware. And this was only the beginning. Isaac took a deep breath and opened the thick folder Harris had sent him over 3 months ago. The pages were creased and dog-eared, clear signs that he had read them dozens of times. He handed me a photocopy, his voice low and heavy, as if sinking into the depths of the Detroit River behind us. "Melissa, this is the worst part." The title on the first page read, "Reinvestigation Report, 2004. Vehicle accident resulting in 2 fatalities." The air around me seemed to solidify. Harris, meticulous as ever, with a background in handling some of Detroit's largest cases, had done what the police 2 decades ago didn't have enough evidence to do. He traced back the repair history of my parents' car. And on the 3rd line, the truth cut through me like a cold blade. The brakes had been tampered with. Not mechanical failure, not an accident, intentional. I whispered, "That's not possible." But Isaac shook his head. "We've believed that for too long." He flipped to the next page. Grainy images from an old maintenance camera near Jefferson Avenue showed a man in a gray coat crouching next to our parents' car. Harris's report clearly stated, the man had been paid through an account tied to Caldwell. My heart raced, my face burning and then going cold. "Why would he—" "Why?" I stammered, barely recognizing my own voice. Isaac pointed to a section of a financial statement Harris had unearthed. A trail of transactions led straight to the ugly truth. Caldwell wanted Miller Construction. Dad refused. He said the company was a family legacy, not a commodity for sale. A month later, the accident happened. I looked out at the river, the Detroit waters flowing strong, as if trying to wash everything away, but the memories stuck like mud. Isaac continued, his voice now edged with a sorrow I had never heard before. Melissa, our parents didn't die by fate. They were murdered by Caldwell's design. I wrapped my arms tightly around myself, trying to stay upright. Just when I thought I couldn't bear more, Isaac went on, his voice catching. And Tiffany. She's just an extension of that plan. Caldwell raised her from 13. He pushed her into Detroit's finance world, taught her how to manipulate men, heirs, businessmen. Do you get it? Tiffany was trained from childhood to seduce targets through emotion and marriage. That's her job. My entire body trembled, not from the cold, but from a violent storm of rage, grief, and guilt twisted together. How long have you known all this? I asked. Isaac clenched his fist, the knuckles pale. His eyes met mine, steady but aching. I've always known this day would come. The wind off the Detroit River picked up, as if trying to carry away the last pieces of the childhood I thought I had preserved. I leaned against the porch railing, my legs no longer feeling like my own. But Isaac turned to me, placing his warm, steady hand on my shoulder, a touch just firm enough to pull me back to the present. His face had darkened, but his eyes remained calm, eerily calm. He had braced himself for this day long ago, while I had been tossed into the storm with no warning. Melissa, he said softly, his voice low enough for only me to hear. I need you to be strong, right now. I looked at him, my eyes stinging with tears, mascara streaked like ink stains. How can I be strong, Isaac? I just lost my husband. I just found out our parents were murdered. And Tiffany... Isaac interrupted, gently but firmly. I know. But we can't let Caldwell know you heard everything. He stepped closer, gripping my hand like he feared I might collapse at any second. Melissa, you have to act. Act like nothing's wrong. You're still the sweet wife, the oblivious sister-in-law. You have to smile. You have to be normal. You have to make them believe the trap hasn't sprung yet. My throat tightened. Isaac, I don't know if I can do it. You can, Isaac said, unwavering. Just a few more minutes. Then everything flips. He gently wiped the smudged mascara from beneath my eyes with his jacket sleeve. I bowed my head, inhaling deeply, trying to collect whatever strength I had left. My hands were trembling so badly I barely felt human, but I had to stay upright. I had to survive this. I had to let it all play out according to Isaac's plan. Just a few more minutes, he repeated, squeezing my hand as if sealing a pact. And then we stepped off the porch, walking down the stone path toward the ceremony, where white ribbons fluttered in the Detroit breeze, where guests were laughing, where a live band played its cheerful afternoon tune. I walked beside Isaac, head high, wearing a smile as cold and smooth as glass. No one knew my eyes were still wet. No one knew my heart had just been torn to dust. No one knew I had just watched my life disintegrate inside my brother's house. We walked into the wedding, as if nothing had happened. But what I didn't expect was that the moment we returned to the ceremony grounds, Tiffany was standing among a group of female colleagues from Aurelian Holdings, laughing brightly like she hadn't just been kissing my husband in a bedroom minutes earlier. That smile, so round, so radiant, so professional, was the kind trained to reassure clients, but to me, it looked like a polished mask hiding a layer of toxic sludge underneath. And Michael, he wasn't far off, leaning casually against the wooden arch, chatting effortlessly with my cousins Lindsay and Kayla, like a man confident the whole world revolved around him. He smiled lightly, hands in his pockets, so relaxed I almost questioned whether I had imagined everything in that room. My heart clenched again. Everything was playing out too smoothly, too normally, as if they were well practiced in living double lives, in performing before an audience. And just as the tension reached its choking peak, a deep, sharp male voice cut through the air from the back gate. So loud and angry, the acoustic music faltered. "Tiffany!" The entire ceremony turned at once. I turned too, and saw an older man in a black suit with salt and pepper hair walking in like he was here to collect a long overdue debt. Beside him stood a younger woman in a blouse labeled assistant, holding an iPad. I didn't know who he was, but Tiffany froze. Her face drained of color. Isaac whispered, "That's Reese, Tiffany's former boss, and ex-boyfriend." The crowd started murmuring. Someone set their champagne glass down. Others stood to get a better look. Tiffany took half a step back, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" Reese smirked coldly, the kind of smile worn by someone who'd been shattered to the bone and returned for justice. He signaled to his assistant. She tapped her iPad. A moment later, Tiffany's sobbing voice echoed across the wedding through a Bluetooth speaker by the band. "Please, my mom's in an accident. They said she needs an $80,000 surgery urgently. I don't know what to do. I promise I'll pay you back in a week. I swear." The air froze. Even the wind from the Detroit River couldn't drown out the sobs and broken pleas in the recording. Reese signaled to switch screens. A wire transfer receipt, $80,000. Transaction date, November of last year. Just 1 month before Tiffany began her secret affair with Michael. The murmuring turned into buzzing. Reese looked Tiffany straight in the eye, voice shaky but brimming with fury. "After I sent the money, you blocked me on everything. Phone, email, socials. You disappeared like I never existed. And at the time, you were still my girlfriend." Tiffany screamed, voice shrill and desperate. "It wasn't me. You were set up. That's fake." Reese's assistant played another clip, a text message. "Tiffany, don't text me anymore. We're done." Her voice, her number, unmistakable. From the seats, someone gasped. "She conned her ex out of 80 grand? She took the money and ghosted him? My God!" The whispers caught like wildfire across dry grass. I looked at Tiffany, the woman who had kissed my husband, and for the first time all day, I didn't feel pain anymore. I just felt hollow, and not a shred of pity. There she stood, trembling at the center of her own wedding, pale and exposed. No longer the perfect bride, just the truth, dragged into the Detroit sunlight with merciless clarity. And that merciless truth wasn't done. Isaac knew exactly what came next. While the murmurs still hadn't died down, he stepped calmly onto the small wooden platform he'd built for the ceremony. Standing tall beneath the floral arch, his figure cast a long shadow across the grass, like a warning about to descend. He signaled to the band to stop playing, then took the microphone left by the MC. No long speech, no explanation. He simply looked straight at Tiffany, now trembling under the weight of 100 stares, and spoke with a voice so cold even the Detroit River behind us seemed to pause. "Let's see what our bride was up to 2 hours before the wedding." He pressed a button on a small remote. The big screen set up at the back of the lawn lit up, and in that moment, the wedding turned into a horror film premiere. The first image, Tiffany and Michael in Isaac's bedroom, uncensored, unblurred, undeniable. Michael lifting her wedding dress, Tiffany's arms around his neck, the sounds of kissing, breathless gasps, whispered words I'd never forget. Then Michael's voice rang out, clear as if he were whispering behind my shoulder. "My dumb lawyer wife has no clue." The crowd erupted. A woman screamed. Someone dropped a wine glass. Elderly guests leapt to their feet, mouths open in shock. Tiffany's colleagues stepped away, like she'd suddenly become a wild animal. My cousins, who had just been chatting with Michael, looked at him like he'd tracked radioactive waste into their home. A guest cried out, "Good God, that's the bride?" Another, "Cheating right before the ceremony? What in the world?" Rage spread like wildfire through the crowd. Tiffany froze for a few seconds, then exploded. She shrieked, eyes bloodshot. "Melissa, you ruined everything! You set me up!" She slammed her hand onto the table, knocking over a champagne flute that spilled across her pristine white gown like cold splashes of blood. Guests stepped back. A young server stared at her in terror. But me? I stood silent in the crowd. No reaction, none needed. This wasn't my revenge. This was the truth tearing itself open, raw and unfiltered, without me lifting a finger. Michael stood frozen a few feet away, face pale as paper, eyes darting like a man searching for a non-existent exit. There was nowhere left to run, no lie left to tell. And Isaac. He stood firm on the stage, unmoved by Tiffany's screaming. No anger, no gloating, just cold resolve. Because he knew this was only the beginning of the trap he'd spent 6 months building. As Tiffany screamed, Michael stood paralyzed, and the guests buzzed like a courtroom under open sky. Harris, the 58-year-old detective behind the entire investigation, stepped forward. His eyes were steel, filled with truths no one had dared touch for 20 years. He plugged a USB into the venue's speaker system and spoke, each word striking like nails into wood. This is footage from the Jefferson Avenue repair shop, and this is the man Caldwell paid to clear the road in the 2004 crash. Instantly, dozens of eyes turned to Caldwell, sitting in the front row, trying to appear composed, but betraying himself with a twitch of the jaw. Feeling the weight of the crowd, he shot to his feet, adjusting his tie, voice raised. "This is a misunderstanding! Or worse, a deliberate smear campaign!" He didn't finish the sentence, because from the crowd, a silver-haired, red-eyed man emerged. His shirt was wrinkled, hands trembling as if fending off a ghost that had haunted him for decades. He stepped into the center of the wedding, voice breaking. I was that man." Silence fell. "Caldwell paid me." He swallowed hard. "I cut the brakes on your parents' car. I thought it was just a scare tactic. I didn't know they'd die." He bowed his head, shoulders shaking. "For 20 years, every thunderstorm, every downpour, I've had nightmares. I see the car flying off the cliff. I hear the scream of a pregnant woman. I can't live with it anymore." I broke. Not the way I did when I discovered Michael's betrayal, but a sob that came from the deepest part of me, buried for 20 years. I rushed to Isaac, and we clung to each other like children lost in a storm. Harris didn't soften. Caldwell didn't just order the brakes cut. He raised Tiffany from age 13, sponsored her, groomed her, pushed her into Detroit's financial world, all to turn her into a strategic marriage weapon to infiltrate families and seize companies. Tiffany collapsed to her knees, eyes wide, lips trembling in shock. No, that's not true. He was my father." Harris looked her dead in the eye. "He was never your father. He made you his asset." The screen changed. Emails, texts, wire transfers, transaction logs between Caldwell and his network. With every piece of evidence, Caldwell took a step back, his hardened face slowly crumbling, though his eyes stayed icy. Isaac stepped forward, his voice drawn taut like a snapped wire. "You didn't just kill our parents. You destroyed the life of the girl you pretended to raise." Tiffany turned to Caldwell, tears flooding her eyes. You used me?" Caldwell said nothing, no denial, no defense, just stared at Tiffany like a tool that had outlived its purpose. And in that moment, amid the chaos of the Detroit wedding, the bride sank to the grass, her white gown stained with dust, looking up at the man she'd called father for 15 years, and finally understanding that she had only ever been his second victim. At that moment, I thought Tiffany had collapsed for good, but she sprang to her feet. No more tears, no more trembling, no more pleading. Only a bare, steely gaze, sharp as metal, the look of someone who had lost everything and was now desperate to drag someone else down with her. And that gaze locked onto me. Before anyone could react, Tiffany lunged for the nearest table and snatched a silver fork. The clang of metal against metal rang out, making several guests recoil in alarm. I stood frozen, my legs nailed to the grass, I had just learned my parents were murdered. My marriage had just imploded. And now, the bride was charging at me with madness in her eyes. Tiffany screamed, throat shredding, echoing across the wedding. "You ruined my life! This is all your fault!" She charged at me, fork raised. Everything happened in under 2 seconds. I hadn't even closed my eyes when a blur shot out from the side. Michael. In a rare moment of clarity, or perhaps just instinct, he leapt in front of me. "Melissa, move!" he cried, voice breaking. Then thud. The fork plunged into Michael's shoulder. That sound, the sound of metal tearing into flesh, froze the entire crowd. Blood spattered across his white shirt, spreading like a red blossom blooming from tragedy. Isaac shouted, "Grab her!" 2 venue security guards tackled Tiffany. She was pulled backward, arms flailing, screaming like a trapped animal. "Let me go! She destroyed me! She took everything from me!" Guests recoiled, some women crying. The band had stopped, the suspended guitar notes still hanging in the air like a question left unanswered. I watched Michael collapse onto the grass, blood seeping through his fingers as he clutched the wound. He looked up at me, eyes pained, exhausted, and for the first time in our entire marriage, honest. I'm sorry. But I couldn't speak, couldn't touch him, couldn't cry. I just stood there, watching the wreckage Tiffany had unleashed, watching the downfall of a traitor, and watching myself stand at the center of a whirlwind life had thrown me into. Tiffany was restrained and dragged from the wedding, but her scream echoed, tearing through Detroit's spring air. "Why do you get everything while I get nothing?" Tiffany's scream rang out like the final groan of rusted metal crumbling under pressure. And then, handcuffs gleamed under the Detroit sunset. Caldwell, still clinging to the image of a powerful CEO, was escorted down the gravel path by 2 officers. Patrol car lights flickered across his face with rhythmic finality. He tried to hold his head high, offered a faint sneer, but his voice shook. "This is a mistake. I'll sue all of you. I'm innocent." No one believed him. No one had patience for lies anymore. Tiffany, restrained by venue security, thrashed wildly, her voice cracking with hopeless desperation. "It was Caldwell. He made me. I was just following orders. I didn't want any of this." But her cries only made a few guests shake their heads, others whispering, "Tragic, but deserved." Her sobs tangled with the wail of police sirens, echoing across the riverside garden once filled with flowers and string lights, now a battlefield of truth. At the corner of the lawn, Michael was being supported by medics, his shoulder hastily wrapped in gauze, already soaked dark red. His eyes met mine for a moment. No arrogance, no pretending, only regret, and something that looked like fear. But I didn't go to him, didn't ask, didn't care. I let the medics take him away toward the first aid station behind the catering tents. He no longer belonged in my life. I let myself sink onto the grass, right where I had thought I might die from fear just minutes earlier. My back touched the earth, eyes gazing up at Detroit's dusk-streaked sky. For the first time during this harrowing ceremony, I could breathe. Not happy, not victorious, just relieved, because the truth no longer sat on my chest. Isaac sat beside me in silence. The wedding was chaos, like the aftermath of a disaster film, but between us there was a strange, quiet calm. He pulled out an old laminated photo and handed it to me. It was our parents, smiling beside the rental SUV for their final trip. My heart clenched. Isaac spoke slowly, like finally telling a story he'd carried alone for too long. Caldwell once pursued Mom. She said no. Then he went after Dad. Another no. He tried to buy Miller Construction, twice. Dad refused, said it was a family legacy. 1 month later, the brakes failed. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time all day, my tears didn't fall from pain, but from the realization of everything I had been too blind to see. Isaac had been quietly fighting for me for 20 years, quietly uncovering, quietly confronting, quietly saving each piece of the truth, waiting for the right moment to reveal it all, so I wouldn't be dragged into the violence of power. "I'm sorry," he said, voice breaking. "I couldn't save Mom and Dad. But I swore I'd save you. I gripped his hand, and for the first time in this whole ruinous afternoon, I felt like I still had a family. I still had someone who stood in the storm to shield me. And it was that feeling, that sense of being loved with quiet strength, that made me realize I had to close the old chapter before stepping into the next. The scent of damp grass lingered as the sound of an ambulance echoed from the front gate. I watched, not from worry, but because I knew a door needed to be shut, hard and final. An hour later, I was at Detroit Mercy Hospital. The white hallway was so cold my breath fogged in the air. A nurse led me to a small ER room where Michael sat, shoulder heavily bandaged, his hospital gown wrinkled, his eyes vacant like a lost animal. When I entered, he looked up, not with the defiance I'd seen in our old fights, but with the eyes of a man who'd lost everything and didn't know where to cling. "Melissa!" His voice was hoarse, tired, close to breaking. I stood 3 steps away, close enough to hear, far enough to stay untouched by pity. Michael sighed, burying his face in his hands, and then spoke, each word like a confession on trial. "I did love you, at least at first. But I was stupid. I gambled. You didn't know. I embezzled $120,000 from the company to cover my debts." He swallowed hard. "Tiffany found out. She threatened me. Said if I didn't play along, she'd tell the board. I got scared." I watched him silently. No rage, no pain, no sympathy. Because sometimes the worst thing someone can feel is nothing at all for the person who destroyed them. "None of this was your fault," Michael whispered through shallow breaths. "I was wrong. I betrayed you, because I was afraid of owning my mistakes." I didn't need to hear more. I replied with exactly one sentence, the only one our marriage ever truly deserved. "Save it for the judge." Michael broke into sobs, not the cries of a man redeemed, but the wail of someone who had lost his reputation, his freedom, his career, and the only person who ever truly stood by him. His sobs echoed through the sterile white room, while I turned and walked away, steps light, like I had finally let go of the weight of a broken marriage. But justice didn't end in that hospital room. It surged onward like the powerful waves of the Detroit River, dragging every buried secret to the surface. 3 months later, summer in Detroit was hotter and more dazzling than ever, but inside the glass towers of downtown, the heat didn't keep anyone from shivering under the weight of the biggest trial Michigan media had covered in over a decade. Caldwell, once a powerful CEO, now appeared in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed. The arrogance that once ruled Detroit's financial world had vanished from his face. The prosecutor read each charge as if peeling back the final layers of his disguise. Conspiracy to commit murder in relation to my parents' crash. Money laundering through multiple shell companies, years of financial fraud, and exploitation of a minor for criminal purposes. Every accusation fell like a hammer in the packed courtroom. No one saw Caldwell as a businessman anymore, but as a man who had dragged too many lives into ruin. In the adjacent courtroom, Tiffany appeared, no longer the radiant bride from 3 months ago, but gaunt and hollow-eyed. She faced charges of assault with a deadly weapon, the fork attack on Michael, financial fraud, suspicious transactions from Aurelian, and romance-based fraud, with Reese and others. Tiffany sobbed and begged, but her voice was lost beneath the cold clang of the Wayne County judge's gavel. As for Michael, the man who once wore expensive suits like armor, stood with his head bowed, accepting a plea deal, probation, and a $120,000 restitution to the company. He didn't look at me. Maybe he couldn't. My divorce was finalized in a side room. 8 minutes. No tears. No disputes. No regrets. Michael's name was crossed off the legal paperwork, and I walked out feeling like I had just severed the last chain. Weeks later, I packed up my small Detroit apartment, carried a worn suitcase and a family journal, and left for California. Some might call it running, but for me, it was rebirth. California welcomed me with salty ocean wind, with skies so wide my scars felt smaller. I rented a room near the Santa Monica Animal Rescue Center where they were hosting an adoption event. And that's where I met David. He stood beside a small brown mutt, gently cleaning a wound on its paw with such tenderness that I stopped in my tracks. His eyes were kind, his voice warm, and his smile felt safe. When he heard I wanted to adopt a chubby little dog, he grinned. "That one's gonna make your life pretty interesting." I didn't know then that the man with the vet scrubs and scarred hands would be the first person I'd truly open up to after everything. We started with walks, morning coffees, and conversations free of judgment. David didn't ask about my past, but stayed when I was ready to share. And slowly, I relearned how to trust, how to let someone hold my hand, how to love without fearing complete ruin. A year later, beneath the soft waves of a California beach, David and I had a small wedding with just 12 guests and one little dog as the flower girl. The next morning, holding my newborn son Noah in my arms, I realized life had completed a beautiful circle I never thought possible. That night, while David and Noah slept, I opened my journal and wrote one line. I didn't lose a husband. I walked away from the dark. I closed the journal and set it on the wooden table by the window, where the soft golden light shone down like a candle, marking the start of a new chapter. Beside me, Noah breathed peacefully in my arms, his tiny warmth softening every place inside me that had once turned to stone. And in that moment, I knew I had stepped into another journey, one where the past was no longer a chain wrapped around my feet. 1 week later, Isaac flew to California. He appeared at my door with a small suitcase and a smile so bright it lit up the entire hallway. I hugged him for a long time, as if trying to embrace all the childhood moments he had filled in for. Every breakfast, every parent-teacher meeting, every freezing Detroit winter. He looked at Noah, meeting his nephew for the first time, and his eyes turned red. "His name? Noah?" he asked. I nodded, took a breath, and said, "Isaac. Would you be his godfather?" He laughed, voice rough with emotion. "I promised I'd protect you, Melissa, and I'll keep that promise to him, too." And for the first time, I felt I was truly inside a family, one I had chosen, not the one that once broke me. One afternoon, while David was watering the lavender pots outside, I sat alone in my workroom, looking at the old divorce papers I had kept as a quiet reminder. The edges had yellowed, Michael's signature scratched across the page like a scar from a past life. I placed it on a metal dish, struck a lighter, and watched the soft blue flame rise, licking across the words "petition for divorce." I watched the ash drift upward, bits of a decade of pain finally released into the sky. David came in, placed his hand gently on my shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered. I looked up at him, the man whose hands had healed animals and now healed my heart. For the first time, I smiled. I'm truly free. The California sunset spilled over the beach like molten honey. The waves gently erased fresh footprints in the sand. David held my hand, and I cradled Noah against my chest, his small, beating heart so warm and alive. We stood there, 3 small souls before the vast ocean, and I had never felt stronger. Behind me, the past dissolved into the sea like it had never been. Ahead, only light. I closed my eyes, and in the rhythm of the waves, I heard my own voice rise. Soft as wind, solid as stone. Betrayal made me fall, but truth helped me rise. Thank you for staying until the end. Your presence here tells me you despise lies and betrayal too. If this story could lift someone else's spirit, please like, subscribe, and share to carry this strength further. I'll see you in the next story.